There once was a legendary warrior by the name of Hosen who belonged to the Yato clan. He spent his life challenging opponents on the battlefield, ruthlessly slaughtering all who opposed him. For that was the way the Yato lived. They were violent, bloodthirsty creatures whose strength was unrivaled across the entire universe. Hosen was a conqueror. He took everything he wanted with his own two hands. Glory, riches, women, nothing was impossible for him. But the Yato and even Hosen had a natural predator, one they could never hope to defeat: the sun. The sun was a dangerous thing for the Yato. It would dry up their skin and cripple them under direct exposure. Hosen felt that the sun was the final enemy that he needed to defeat, to snuff out its eternal flame so that he could live in an everlasting night, and truly live up to his title that was the King of the Night. On Earth, in the nation of the samurai, Japan, Hosen took over his own land there, enslaving its inhabitants to build his kingdom. One of its residents, a child, asked him why he had an umbrella out on such a sunny day. She pitied him for not admiring the beauty of the sun. At that encounter, it occurred to Hosen that his worst enemy took many forms, but he would break this girl, as he had always done, against anything that went against him. Once, she had told him that he should not fight the sun. It was a ridiculous notion to a man who conquered all in his path. The girl had made a crude drawing of the sun for him, an act which his followers saw as an insult, and she was punished as a result. The girl had drawn it as an attempt to break the barrier between Hosen and the sun. She shined so irritatingly bright before him. This girl was no mere reflection of the sun. She was the real thing. Hosen had built a red light district called Yoshiwara Tokenkyo deep under the earth, a paradise for materialistic, greedy men, where the culture revolved around forcing the women to partake in prostitution for its customers. In doing this, Hosen was determined to drag the sun down into eternal darkness in his paradise, where there was nothing that could stop him, not even the sun. But as the years passed, the blinding light emanating from that girl never dimmed, no matter how much she was punished. Gintama's Yoshiwara in Flames arc has an increasingly oppressive, confining atmosphere to it the further the story progresses. Like many other more dramatic Gintama arcs, this one starts off unassuming and full of that classic Gintama comedic charm. However, as more is revealed about the titular Red Light District and the people who live within it, the arc begins to expose certain fundamental truths about the human condition that most do not want to admit. The main focus of this essay will be the themes of this arc that contribute to the narrative of true freedom, and as such, I will largely forego mentioning other themes present in this arc, such as the theme of found family, or the dynamics between Kagura and Kamui. I am working on a massive found family Gintama video in particular. While the immersion is broken, I wanted to give a reminder that if you want to see more of my essays, then you can subscribe to this channel, and if you would like to support my work, I have a Patreon and a Stream Elements link for donations in the description, as well as a goal on my throne page for my medical bills. The courtesans of Yoshiwara live in a hellish reality. These women are confined to a small world and have not caught so much as a glance of the sky in many years. Some are even sold to this place as children, and as they grow up, are forced to learn how to act as servants to the customers. The women had lost the opportunity to have proper childhoods, and it sometimes shows in their nasty personalities. They put on an act for their customers, but the veil can drop quickly when someone acts out of line. They would like nothing more than to be free from this prison, but the endless pursuit from Hosen's forces makes surviving an escape an impossible task. Although the women are slaves, they are not completely helpless, thanks to the presence of the paramilitary force, the Hyaka, which consists exclusively of women. However, while this force is committed to protecting the courtesans, they are also obligated to execute those who step out of line or try to escape. At least, that's how it's supposed to go. The boss of the Hyaka, Tsukuyo, is one of the most influential women in the history of Yoshiwara. Ever since she worked herself up to the position of boss, she had been secretly hiding the escapee prostitutes within the Hyaka, and scarred their faces to ensure that they would never have to serve as courtesans again. Despite Tsukuyo herself being called the courtesan of death, she was one of the few positive saving graces within Yoshiwara. Tsukuyo was sold to the district as a child, and it did not take long for her to realize that this place was devoid of hope. There was no freedom of choice here for the women, only servitude to paying customers. She could see it in the eyes of every courtesan in Yoshiwara, the complete and utter dread. That was until she met a certain woman. Tsukuyo was regularly punished for acting out of line and looking at her superiors with scorn. The prestigious courtesan Hinowa told her that she would not last long in Yoshiwara with a rebellious face like that. It wasn't that Hinowa was on board with the harsh treatment of women and young girls in this place, but she grew to understand that if one wished to survive, they needed to not only be strong in their independence, but in restraint as well. Tsukuyo was not willing to hear Hinowa out, and she would rather have died than grow up to become as hopeless as the women of this place. Hinowa could tell where Tsukuyo's head was at. The girl saw this place as a pit where all light went to die, and who could blame her? Hinowa, on the contrary, believed that that was only true if one let it be so. It is only natural for the oppressed to feel as if the only way to escape their misery is to escape their oppressors, but the pain and trauma from confinement runs far deeper than one's physical surroundings. No matter where you are, where you live, you cannot escape the reality that life is a prison, and that there will always be shackles around your ankles if you believe that freedom can only be obtained by running from your problems. Tsukuyo noticed that the courtesan's eyes would light up when illuminated by the radiant light coming from Hinowa. Despite being separated from the sky, this woman had become the closest thing possible to the sun within this dark cage. Hinowa was steadfast in planting her feet where life had placed her, and to make a change where she was in the moment, to live with an untainted soul no matter where she was. But that did not mean she had no intention of leaving Yoshiwara. Hinowa had assaulted the woman who punished young Tsukuyo. She herself was punished for this seemingly reckless act, but through it, she earned a powerful ally. Someone who would grow up to help break the cages of others, due to being free herself. So, Tsukuyo could have chosen to tirelessly gnaw at her chains in an effort to flee from her misery, and at best, wind up dying in a ditch made from her own insecurities about whether or not she was truly free in this world. Or she could spend that energy on cultivating patience, converting her anger into calculated strikes at the heart of this evil place, by rising up in the ranks in order to make a difference, not just to save herself, but the other women as well. A prisoner does not win until they learn how to understand their true selves and find their own light amidst any darkness. Tsukuyo scarred her own face not solely to escape becoming a prostitute, and not just to join the Hyaka to protect the other women, but to become someone who could watch Hinowa's back. If Hinowa was the sun, walking through the streets and bringing light to the women of Yoshiwara, Tsukuyo was the moon, watching over the things Hinowa could not, and bringing her own light to those she touched. Hinowa was also taken to Yoshiwara when she was only a small girl. I am unsure whether she was born in the land Hosen lorded over above ground before he came to Japan, or if Yoshiwara Togenkyo had even been established before or after she was born, but my assumption is that Hosen was so desperate to defeat the sun that when he met young Hinowa, he specifically built Yoshiwara to snuff out the light that was coming from her. Hinowa believed that the sun did not discriminate against anyone, and shined upon all equally. She tried to impress this onto Hosen, but he would not hear it. Thus, Hinowa would be confined underground, and forced to learn the ways of prostitution and servitude, and to see the hope diminish in other women and children. Her ideals would be tested to their utmost limits. For many years, she did her best to keep her childlike spirit alive, and the brighter Hinowa shined, the deeper the shadows grew around Hosen, who was oh so desperate to make Hinowa, the personification of the sun, come down to her knees begging him for mercy, to completely submit to his rule, so that he could finally feel whole and become the true king of the night. Hosen only knew how to express his desires for both love and hate through oppression, and so all he had to grasp with was sharpened claws. As he got older, looking back on the path he had walked in life, he realized that there was nothing he could ever cherish, even the things he held onto the tightest, especially those things he could never truly have for himself. Ironically enough, there was a child born within Hosen's own city who would be a foil to his blood-stained way of living. When a woman of Yoshiwara became pregnant, it was part of that city's law that the mother and her child were to be executed. However, there was one such prostitute who had the assistance of a number of women who protected her and her baby. Unfortunately, the mother did not survive the birth, but the child, a boy named Seita, did, and it was none other than Hinowa who took it upon herself to bring salvation to this boy. Seita was a source of hope for the women of Yoshiwara. By setting him free from this hell, they could take solace in knowing that one of their own was living in the world above, away from certain death. I think there is a possibility that Hinowa was beginning to lose the will to be herself after such a long time of living in Yoshiwara, and Seita's birth rekindled the flame within her. After all, even the sun cannot shine on its own forever. She knew that fleeing the city would mean her inevitable death, but if it meant that the boy who gave her and the other women life again would get to live on himself, then it would be more than worth it. And this affection went both ways. Seita lived on the surface for 8 years, and after his old caretaker had passed away, he became desperate to see his mother. At the time, he thought that Hinowa and himself were connected by blood, and that she had abandoned him simply because she did not want him. But regardless of that, he needed to see her. He looked up at her radiance and knew that this was a woman who was worth seeing, no matter what. He went as far as to pick pockets from those on the surface in order to pay for just one night to see Hinowa as a customer. Then, he could feel satisfied that he at least got to speak with her once, even if she would not end up caring about him. With the help of the Yorozuya, Tsukuyo, and the unprecedented assistance of Kamui, Seita was granted the opportunity to see Hinowa, and that was where he learned the harsh truth of his real mother's demise, and the fact that Hinowa's legs became crippled because of her choice to protect him. But he had also learned that he was only alive now because of her selflessness back then. To Seita, she had earned the right to be his mother, and just as he was willing to do anything to see her, he used that same determination to carry her away from Hosen. The King of the Night had foolishly pursued violence and oppression in a desperate attempt to grasp for a sense of freedom and control in his life. In doing this, Hosen had created a prison for his own soul. But Seita shows that that is not the only way to live. He had acted selfishly by picking pockets, but when he was granted the opportunity by Otose to earn that money through work, he accepted it and poured his soul into helping her run her snack bar. Hosen would not admit it, But just like Seita, he too wanted Hinowa's love, but with his sharp claws, he could never hold her. Unlike Hosen, Seita was honest with himself about what he wanted, and he worked tirelessly to get to Hinowa by helping others, choosing to achieve his goals through compassion, just like Tsukuyo learned to do to find her light within her prison. Only through kindness to both yourself and those around you can you truly be free. If you live closed off and violent like Hosen, your desires and impulses will consume you to the point of twisting your soul and creating a larger gap between yourself and the things you care about. Those who are afraid will do good to act in the midst of fear. However, as Hosen shows, there is a wrong way to go about it. If one lashes out at the world to make up for their weaknesses, well, that is just another form of running away. Seita was spurred to action from his fear of loneliness, and ultimately used his motivation to help others whilst also working towards his own goals. This is in line with Hinowa's philosophy of fighting within your cage to make a change despite your demons, instead of simply fighting or running away from them. As for the lazy samurai, Sakata Gintoki, he too had to learn what true freedom means. When Asaemon spared him from being executed and free to live on, he had not yet truly become free. He hated himself for what he had to do to his sensei, and trapped himself within a prison of his own self-loathing. It wasn't until Otose took him in under the pretense of being her watchdog that he realized where he needed to direct his mental energy. Over time, the number of people he wanted to protect grew, and he came to see that his failure was not the end. And so, when he learned about how the women of Yoshiwara were suffering, and that there was a boy desperate to see his mother, Gintoki took it upon himself to help them break away from their physical prison. He emphasized to Hosen that the efforts of Hinowa, Seita, Tsukuyo, and everyone else trapped in Yoshiwara were all small candles contributing to the birth of a much larger light that would never go out as long as one remained lit. The unbreakable bonds Gintoki had with Kagura and Shinpachi were like a lighter that would keep his flame lit forever, and everyone in Yoshiwara had the same thing. Their bonds are what kept them going in that hellish lifestyle for so long. Having even just one person in your life to remind you of who you are is enough to save you from falling into the black. But it is up to you to form those bonds, and be the lighter for the candles that surround you. With the collective efforts from everyone, they would break through the artificial night that Hosen had constructed, and remind the city what a clear, sunny sky looked like. And there was one man who would come to see that sky for what it was for the very first time. Just as Hinowa never stopped believing in herself and her friends and family, she also never stopped believing that Hosen would open his eyes one day and see the light within himself. I believe that someone can only be as strong as Hinowa had been for all those years by seeing the good within even the most vile people. It is much easier said than done, and that does not mean people like Hosen necessarily should be forgiven for the terrible things they have committed, but when given the chance to help anyone discover the goodness within, Hinowa always had, and always will, do her best. And that is what makes her so strong. She possesses the ability to understand her own emotions, but also knows how to see outside of herself and help other victims learn how to survive. Class dismissed.